the cornering ability of this car is fantastic, even without the e-LSD. You may remember last week I tested the brand new Ford Focus ST petrol, and that was a fantastic car. After sadly giving the keys back for that, I was handed this, another ST. What's the difference? Well, this one is bright orange, it's a hatchback, oh, and it is a diesel. Yes, that's right, like the older generation of the Focus ST, the new one is available with either a petrol or a diesel. But is it any good? I think a good place to start is, of course, the engine. So, like the old car, this is a 2 litre 4-cylinder unit, but that's pretty much where the similarities end. This is an EcoBlue engine. What that means is this engine has 10% more power and twice as much torque. Yes, impressive stuff. So this has 190 horsepower, which is more than a Volkswagen Golf GTD, and this has 400 Newton meters of torque, or 295 pound-feet if you prefer the old method. This is also more than a Golf GTD, but this car is actually a little bit slower. So this will hit 62 miles per hour in 7.6 seconds, which is a little bit slower than the Golf, and the top speed is 137 miles per hour, which once more is a little bit behind its Golf counterpart. The power is mated to the front wheels via a 6-speed manual gearbox. Unlike the petrol version of the ST, this one is not available with the 8-speed automatic. Correction, 7-speed automatic. Also, unlike the petrol version, the diesel variant doesn't get the fancy electronic limited slip diff. Instead, this gets torque vectoring. So basically, when you're going through a corner, the car is able to brake the inside wheel to give you better cornering and to reduce understeer, whereas the electronic limited slip diff, that's more advanced, and it has hydraulic clutches and fancy sensors, and overall it is better. But how is this car actually like to drive? Let's find out. One thing I forgot to mention about this engine is it is in fact the most powerful diesel ever fitted to a Focus, and yep, it is no slouch. Sadly, it doesn't get the clever anti-lag technology that you get in the petrol version, but that's not to say that the Ford Performance engineers have become lazy. This engine features a low inertia, variable geometry turbocharger. Good. And it also has steel pistons for less expansion when the engine gets hot. It also has an integrated intake system with mirror image porting for improved combustion. Yeah, I don't know what that means, but that sounds jolly good. Let me tell you about how the engine performs. As you would expect from a diesel, you get a nice bit of mid-range grunt, and it really does pull well. It is like an Orange Fury coloured train. Okay, that's a really bad analogy, I do apologise, but you get my point. The pulling power of this diesel engine is pretty impressive. And I have to say, it makes a more pleasant noise than I was expecting. Okay, so there is some electronic trickery for the sound coming into the cabin, so this does have a sound imposer, but even so, let me drop it down at 1 or 2 gears. I do think it sounds pretty good. This may not get the anti-lag technology like the petrol version, but one thing the petrol and diesel have in common is the lovely slick changing 6-speed manual gearbox. Ford states that this gearbox has a 7% shorter throw compared to a standard Focus, and even the standard Focus has got a pleasing gear change. So the action in this is lovely. It's got a nice weight to it, it feels mechanical and slick. Yes, I know I've already said slick once, but slick is a good word for this gearbox. And also, like the petrol version, all of the controls in here have got a nice weight to them. They feel meaty, they feel chunky. They feel firm but not overly heavy, so you could easily drive this car every day, in my opinion. Speaking of driving this car every day, this car does have the performance pack as an optional extra. And you may be thinking, hang on, what does performance have to do with driving this car every day? Well, for the diesel version of the ST, the performance pack gives you something called continuously controlled damping. In essence, this is adaptive suspension, which is able to monitor itself every 2 seconds, as well as the steering input and the braking input. It works alongside the driving mode, so when you have the car in slippery or normal, you will find the ride is firm but compliant. Pop it into sport mode or track mode. The track mode is also part of the performance pack, and you will find the ride is firm and rather jiggly, but hey, this is a hot hatchback, so you have to expect such a ride. Would I say this is as refined for everyday use as a Golf? Not quite, however, I wouldn't say it's too far behind either. Let me touch upon refinement. I know this is a hot hatch, it isn't really the most important thing, but bearing in mind this is a diesel, therefore it could do more motorway miles, you may be interested in refinement. There is a bit of tyre noise, as you would expect from these 19-inch alloys, but I wouldn't say it's overbearing or deafening, and the wind noise is pretty well controlled. The performance pack for the diesel also gives you a shift indicator, so a light comes up when it's time for you to change gear, and most importantly, yes, that's right, you get the multicolour ambient lighting like you do in the petrol. Ford, why do you include ambient lighting as part of a performance pack? Makes no sense. Two things you don't get for the diesel performance pack are the rev matching, which I'm not too fussed about, and the launch control, which, once again, yes, it's a fun feature to have, but is it really something you're going to use on your way to Tesco? Yeah, probably not. Right, time to speak about the handling. The handling, as you would expect from a fast Ford, is fantastic. The brakes work really well, and in fact, the brakes on the new Focus ST have 4 times the amount of fade resistance compared to the last model, which is pretty significant if you ask me. This car may not get the clever e-LSD, but the torque vectoring still does a good enough job. Do I miss having the e-LSD? Honestly, yeah, I do notice a difference. But the Focus ST still handles well without it. There's a good amount of grip in the corners thanks to the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tyres I have on each corner. Well, I say that, if I'm going to be pedantic, the near side front actually has a Michelin Pilot Supersport tyre on it. Just saying. There's very little body roll through the corners. The steering feels fantastic. In fact, the steering is 15% faster compared to a standard Focus, so from lock to lock it requires just 2 turns. What about practicality? This is a hot hatch after all. The ST is of course based on a standard Focus, meaning you get a car that is fast and practical. The boot is exactly the same as what you would find on a standard Focus, meaning you get 375 litres to play with. That is a decent amount, although it is a little bit smaller than the current Volkswagen Golf GTD. However, if you want even more space, you can of course fold down the 60/40 rear seats to give you 1,354 litres. That incidentally is more than a Volkswagen Golf GTD. The opening for the boot is square, it is wide, it is easy to load things into. The load lip is low, although there is a little bit of a step into the boot, but I wouldn't say it is too steep. You get a hook either side where you can hang up your shopping, and as standard you get a spare wheel, which nowadays is a bit of a rarity. Good stuff. Like the boot, the rear of the Focus ST offers a good amount of space, even if you happen to be sat behind a taller driver. As always, the driver's seat is set for me. I'm 6'2", so I am of course a taller chap. But even so, For me, space in the rear is pretty good. Knee room isn't too bad, and I've got plenty of leg room so I can really stretch out, and my feet fit underneath the seat. So yeah, I can really stretch out and relax. Now, the headroom isn't quite as impressive because as an optional extra, I do have the panoramic roof, which does cut into headroom a little bit. I do have enough, but I would like to have just a little bit more. However, for the majority of adults, headroom in the rear should be fine. Now, speaking of adults, could you fit 3 of them in here? Possibly. It would be quite tight, particularly for your middle passenger. But if you only happen to have 1 or 2 people in the rear, they can, of course, make use of the centre armrest for better comfort. Plus, there's also 2 cup holders in here. So I've got my bottle of drink here. It fits in just fine. And what I quite like is you have prongs to keep your bottle, cup or can in place. A simple feature, but an effective one. You do, of course, have door bins, which once more offer a good amount of room. I've got my bottle of drink in there, and I even have a bit of space left over for a chocolate bar or a packet of chewing gum or any other small item of confectionery. There's also a hook up here where you can hang up an item of clothing, and a netting area in the back of the front seats where you can pop a magazine or an A to Z if you still happen to use one in 2019. You never know. Speaking of modern times, if your rear passengers want to charge their smartphone or their tablet on the go, they can do so because there is a 12-volt socket in the rear. I would prefer a USB port, but I suppose it is better than nothing. Step into the front and you'll find it is as practical and as spacious as the rest of the car. The door bins are of a good size, although you can't really fit a large bottle of drink in there. So this is 1.5 litres, and although it does fit, it's not very secure, so it's likely to fall out. However, for a smaller bottle, it fits just fine, and I have a bit of space left over for some snacks. There's a small cubby hole to the right hand side of the steering wheel, not overly big, but you could potentially put a packet of chewing gum in there, or perhaps some loose change, although the loose change will probably rattle about as you're driving, so probably not a good idea. You have a sunglasses holder up here, which on a day like today is quite handy. A slot down here where you can pop your smartphone, and as an optional extra, this car does have a wireless phone charging pad, which is dead handy. There's a little slot here where you can pop the car key, a good sized cubby hole down here where you can pop quite a few items, or you can pop your drink because you have these adjustable bars that you can use to really secure your bottled can or cup in place. There's also a good amount of storage underneath the centre armrest. You have a tray in here where you can pop some loose change into, lift it out and you'll find a USB port as well as a decent amount of storage. And last but not least, you do of course get a glove box, which once more offers a good amount of room. But how easy is it to get comfortable in the front? Well, very easy. Both the driver's seat and the passenger seat are 6-way electronically adjustable. And the steering wheel also has a good level of adjustment. So to get a good comfortable driving position is very easy. Once again, it is time for Ask Aaron, the segment in which you guys get to ask me questions about whichever car I'm testing. Surprisingly, I only received 2 questions for the Diesel ST, but on the plus side, this should be rather quick. So question 1, does it sound good given the ST trim level? Well, decide for yourself. And the second and last question, do you prefer the petrol version or the diesel? Do you really need to ask that? It's petrol version, of course, it has to be. The cornering ability of this car is fantastic, even without the e-LSD. Have I been able to detect any understeer? Not so far, I haven't. The brakes are fantastic, they're really strong, and they've got a good amount of bite to them as well. One thing I really like about the new Focus ST is just how responsive the steering is. All you need to do is simply flick your wrist and the car is ready to change direction. And despite it being a relatively big car, it feels agile and nimble. It is light on its feet. At this point you may be wondering how much the Diesel ST will set you back. Unlike the previous ST, the new one is available in one trim level and not three. The starting price is £29,495, which includes a whole host of standard features, including ST styling, 19-inch alloys, LED headlights, LED rear lights, torque vectoring, front and rear parking sensors, reversing camera, B&O sound system, Recaro sport seats, heated and electronically adjustable front seats, heated steering wheel, keyless entry, 8-inch touchscreen with DAB radio, Bluetooth, smartphone connectivity and navigation, dual zone climate control, and a generous amount of safety equipment which helped to secure the Focus ST a 5-star Euro NCAP rating. One of the advantages of having this car as opposed to the petrol is of course fuel economy. So on a combined run, this engine offers 50.4 mpg, whereas the petrol has to make do with 34.4. So if you were to drive both cars with a full tank, depending on your driving of course, the petrol would give you about 400 miles of range, whereas the diesel would give you almost 530. So that is quite a big difference. So if you're looking for a hot hatch which won't spend all of its time in a petrol station, this could well be up your street. In regard to CO2 emissions, the petrol version has 179 grams per kilometre of CO2, whereas this car has 125. Again, quite a big difference, I'm sure you'll agree. So there we have it, the Ford Focus ST diesel. It is a good car, but it isn't the ST I would have, although I admire Ford for making a diesel version when, let's face it, diesel isn't exactly flavour of the month. And I admire Ford for fitting a diesel engine into a hot hatchback because it's not something you see very often. Like I say though, I would go for the petrol version, but I can see why people would buy this car because you get a performance car with more fuel economy. So you can kind of have your cake and eat it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it. If so, be sure to like, subscribe and to ring my bell so you get notified every time I make a video. But until the next time guys, be sure to keep up the car obsession.